Here is what is confirmed. In the days following the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie on February 1st, a woman named Savanna gave her first on-camera interview to media covering the case. That interview was recorded, it was broadcast, it entered the public record of this investigation and has been examined by every category of observer from casual viewers to professional analysts since the moment it aired. One of those analysts is a body language expert, a professional whose discipline sits at the intersection of behavioral psychology, forensic interviewing methodology, and the specific science of nonverbal communication under conditions of stress, grief, and deception. A person whose training is not in determining guilt or innocence, whose methodology does not produce conclusions about what a person did or did not do, whose work produces something more specific and more operationally significant than either of those determinations. It produces a behavioral profile, a documented record of what a person's body communicates when their words are saying something different, of where the alignment between verbal and nonverbal communication breaks down, of the specific moments in an interview when what is being said and what is being expressed through posture, gesture, microexpression, and physiological response are not the same message. The body language expert watched Savanna's first interview. He documented what he observed. He analyzed the behavioral data across the full duration of the interview, and he reached a conclusion. His conclusion is disturbing. What he observed, what it means in the context of the behavioral science his methodology applies, and what it adds to everything the federal investigation has already built around the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. That is what follows. Here is what body language analysis is and what it is not. This distinction matters before a single behavioral observation from Savanna's interview is examined. Because the misapplication of body language analysis to criminal investigations has produced wrong conclusions, unjust outcomes, and evidentiary frameworks that courts have correctly rejected when they were presented without the precision the discipline requires. Body language analysis is not lie detection. There is no behavioral signal that reliably and exclusively indicates deception across all individuals in all contexts. The physiological responses associated with stress, which include many of the signals that popular understanding associates with lying, are produced by truthful people under the stress of being interviewed about a traumatic event, just as they are produced by deceptive people managing a false account. A grieving person being asked about someone they love who has disappeared will produce physiological stress responses. Those responses are not evidence of deception. They are evidence of stress. What body language analysis can document when applied by a trained professional with the appropriate methodological rigor is inconsistency. The gap between what a person says and what their nonverbal communication expresses simultaneously. The moments when the verbal account and the behavioral display are not aligned. When the emotion being described and the emotion being displayed are different emotions. When the cognitive load of managing a verbal account produces the specific behavioral signatures of effortful processing that are distinguishable from the behavioral signatures of emotional recall. Those inconsistencies are not proof of anything. They are data points. Data points that, in the context of an active federal investigation, are examined alongside physical evidence, forensic evidence, and every other piece of information the investigation has assembled. They are one lens through which a person's account is examined. Not the only lens, not the most important lens. One lens. The body language expert who watched Savanna's first interview applied that lens. What it revealed is disturbing not because it proves anything. It is disturbing because of what it suggests when placed inside the evidentiary context of a case that has already produced a tunnel, a hidden camera, a 19-hour interrogation, and a backup call from inside a location that federal agents were not prepared to enter. Here is who Savanna is in the context of this investigation. Her full identity and her specific relationship to Nancy Guthrie have not been confirmed at a level that permits public identification beyond her first name and her status as a person who gave a media interview in the period following the disappearance. What is confirmed is that she gave an interview, that the interview was on camera, that it was broadcast and entered the public record, and that her relationship to Nancy Guthrie and to the circumstances of the disappearance was sufficient to make her account relevant to the investigation and to the public following it. People who give media interviews about missing persons cases occupy a specific category in the investigative framework. They are witnesses whose public account has been voluntarily entered into a record that the investigation, the public, and behavioral analysts can examine. They are individuals who chose to speak on camera about events connected to an active federal case. And the decision to speak on camera, in the specific context of an active investigation, is itself a behavioral data point. People speak on camera about active missing persons investigations for different reasons. Some speak because they want to help, because they believe that public attention and public information accelerates the investigative process and increases the likelihood of a positive outcome. Some speak because they are asked to by the investigation itself, as part of the public communication strategy that federal cases sometimes employ to generate tips and witness cooperation. And some speak for reasons that are more complex than either of those categories. For reasons that the body language expert who watched Savanna's interview documented in the behavioral data he collected across its duration. What those reasons were, what the behavioral data suggested about the relationship between what Savanna said on camera and what was happening beneath the surface of what she said. That is the analysis that produced a conclusion described as disturbing. Here is what the body language expert observed in the first minutes of the interview. The opening of a media interview about a missing person is behaviorally significant because it establishes the baseline. The behavioral baseline is the foundation of the entire analysis. It is the record of how a specific individual presents when they are speaking about material that is not cognitively or emotionally loaded. Before the difficult questions, before the specific inquiries about events and timelines and relationships that require careful management. Before the interview moves into the territory that produces stress responses, the baseline tells the analyst what this specific person looks like when they are not under the specific pressures the interview will eventually apply, what their default posture is, what their natural gesture patterns are, what their resting facial expression is, what their eye movement pattern is when they are engaged in ordinary recall versus when they are engaged in something more effortful. Every deviation from that baseline, as the interview progresses and the questions become more specific and more directly connected to the events of February 1st and the circumstances surrounding Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, is a data point, not a conclusion. A data point whose significance is determined by its consistency, its timing relative to specific questions, and its alignment or misalignment with what Savanna was saying at the moment the deviation occurred. The body language expert established Savanna's baseline in the opening minutes of the interview. What that baseline showed was a person presenting as composed, as someone managing the public dimension of a difficult situation with the specific kind of controlled presentation that people produce when they have prepared for a camera interview and are aware that how they appear matters. That controlled presentation is not suspicious. It is expected. It is the ordinary behavior of a person giving a planned media interview about a serious and emotionally loaded subject. It tells the analyst only that Savanna was aware of the camera and was managing her presentation accordingly. It does not tell them anything about the quality of what she was going to say. What the quality of what she was going to say produced in her behavioral display is what the analysis documents. And what it documents begins in the minutes after the baseline was established, when the interview moved from the opening into the substance of what the interviewer had brought her there to discuss. Here is what the body language expert observed when the interview moved to questions about Nancy Guthrie directly. The transition from baseline territory to substantive territory in a missing persons interview is a behavioral hinge point. It is the moment when the subject of the interview moves from general framing to specific inquiry, from describing who Nancy Guthrie was to being asked about the events and circumstances surrounding her disappearance, from managed presentation to the specific cognitive and emotional demands of the material the interviewer is there to ask about. At that hinge point, Savanna's behavioral display changed, not dramatically. Not in the obvious and unmistakable way that untrained observers sometimes describe as someone becoming nervous or uncomfortable. The change was subtle. It was the kind of change that a trained analyst documents because they know what to look for and where to look for it. And it was the kind of change that, subtle as it was inconsistent with the baseline established in the opening minutes. The body language expert documented the following across the substantive portion of the interview: a pattern of self-soothing gestures at moments of specific inquiry, gestures that are not present in the baseline and that appear with a consistency and timing that the analyst characterized as non-random. Self-soothing is a behavioral response to stress. It is the body's automatic attempt to regulate physiological arousal through physical self-contact. It is a reliable indicator of elevated stress at the specific moments it appears. It is not an indicator of deception. It is an indicator that specific questions are producing specific stress responses that the subject is managing through automatic physical behavior. The pattern is documented. The timing is documented. And the timing of the self-soothing pattern across the interview does not distribute randomly across all of the questions asked. It concentrates. It concentrates around specific questions, specific topics. Specific moments in the interview when the substantive content of what is being asked touches on territory that produces a physiological response Savanna's body is registering even when her verbal account is not. That concentration is the first disturbing element of what the body language expert observed. Here is what the body language expert observed about Savanna's emotional display. Grief is a behavioral phenomenon with a specific phenomenology. The behavioral expression of genuine grief in the context of a missing person's interview has identifiable characteristics. It is not uniform. It does not sustain at a constant level across the duration of an interview. It surges and recedes in response to specific content. It produces specific facial expressions that have been documented in the scientific literature on emotional expression, with sufficient precision that trained analysts can distinguish them from performed or constructed emotional displays. The body language expert examined Savanna's emotional display across the full duration of the interview. What he documented is this: the emotional display was not absent. Savanna expressed what appeared to be distress at multiple points during the interview. Those expressions were visible. They were captured on camera. And for an untrained observer watching the interview, they would have registered as the natural emotional response of a person speaking about someone they care about who has disappeared. The trained observer documented something different. The emotional expressions were present. Their timing was not always consistent with the content that should have been producing them. There were moments when emotionally loaded content, descriptions of Nancy Guthrie, references to the circumstances of her disappearance, details about the investigation and its developments, did not produce the behavioral correlates of emotional response in Savanna's display at the moment the content was delivered. And there were moments when emotional display appeared at points in the interview whose content was less emotionally loaded than the moments that had not produced it. That temporal misalignment between content and emotional display is one of the behavioral signatures that trained analysts document as inconsistent with spontaneous, genuine emotional expression. Genuine emotional expression is reflexive. It is produced by the content in real time, not in advance of it or after it. When the timing is off, the analyst notes the discrepancy and examines it against the surrounding behavioral context to determine whether it represents a meaningful pattern or an artifact of the interview conditions. The body language expert determined that the temporal misalignment in Savanna's emotional display was a meaningful pattern, that it was consistent across multiple instances across the interview, and that its consistency, combined with the self-soothing pattern concentrated around specific questions, produced the behavioral profile that his analysis characterized as disturbing. Here is what the body language expert observed about the verbal and nonverbal alignment in Savanna's account. The alignment between what a person says and what their body simultaneously expresses is one of the most reliable indicators in behavioral analysis because it is one of the most difficult to consistently manage. People can control their words with considerable precision. They prepare verbal accounts. They select language carefully. They manage the specific content of what they say with the deliberate attention of someone who understands that their words are being recorded and examined. Managing the body simultaneously is harder. The nonverbal communication system is largely automatic. It is produced by the same cognitive and emotional processes that produce the verbal account, but it is less accessible to conscious control. A person managing a verbal account carefully is using significant cognitive resources to do so. Those resources are not fully available for simultaneous management of the body's nonverbal communication. The result, in individuals who are producing a verbal account that requires effortful management, is a pattern of misalignment between what is being said and what the body is simultaneously expressing. The body language expert documented specific instances of this misalignment in Savanna's interview. Instances where the verbal account expressed one thing, a specific emotion, a specific level of certainty or uncertainty, a specific relationship to the events being described, and the simultaneous nonverbal display expressed something different. Something that did not match the verbal content in the way that integrated, aligned, authentic communication produces matching verbal and nonverbal signals. Those instances of misalignment were not random. They were not distributed evenly across the full interview in the way that the ordinary noise of human communication would produce. They concentrated around specific topics, around specific moments, around the specific content that the self-soothing pattern had already identified as producing elevated stress responses. The same content that produced the concentrated self-soothing pattern also produced the concentrated instances of verbal and nonverbal misalignment. That double concentration, two independent behavioral signals converging on the same content at the same moments, is the core of what the body language expert's analysis documented. And it is the core of what made his conclusion disturbing. Here is what the body language expert observed about Savanna's eye behavior. Eye behavior is one of the most documented areas of behavioral analysis and one of the most frequently misunderstood. The popular belief that a person looks in a specific direction when lying and a different direction when telling the truth is not supported by the scientific evidence. Eye direction is not a reliable indicator of deception. What eye behavior does reliably indicate is cognitive load, the specific type of cognitive processing being engaged at the moment of the eye movement. Recall, the retrieval of stored memory produces different eye patterns than construction, the assembly of information from component parts. And the cognitive load indicator in eye behavior is not direction. It is consistency and the relationship between eye behavior and the verbal content being produced simultaneously. The body language expert documented Savanna's eye behavior across the interview not to determine whether she was looking in a deceptive direction, but to assess whether the cognitive load her eye behavior indicated was consistent with the type of processing her verbal account suggested she was engaged in. When someone is recalling a memory, their cognitive load has a specific character. When someone is constructing an account, their cognitive load has a different character, and the eye behavior associated with each type of cognitive engagement is distinguishable to a trained analyst examining the full behavioral display rather than a single isolated signal. At specific moments in Savanna's interview, the eye behavior the body language expert documented was not consistent with the type of cognitive processing that the verbal account being produced would predict. The verbal account indicated recall. The eye behavior indicated a different type of cognitive engagement. That discrepancy was noted and documented, and it was noted at moments that overlap with the concentrated self-soothing pattern and the verbal and nonverbal misalignment. Three independent behavioral signals, concentrated around the same content at the same moments, producing a convergent behavioral profile that the analyst characterized as consistent with a specific conclusion.